the summer of 1982, a team of elite Soviet military divers slipped beneath the surface of Lake Baikal for what was supposed to be a routine training exercise, and what they found at 50 meters down was so terrifying that 3 of them would be dead within hours, and the rest would be sworn to silence for the next 40 years. The official story is that nothing happened. The story the divers themselves told, the one that leaked out of classified Soviet naval files decades later, is that they came face to face with something swimming in the dark that was never supposed to exist. Tall, silver, watching them. And recently, footage pulled from the very bottom of that same lake has people asking a question the Russian government has spent half a century trying to bury. What is actually living down there? For a long time this was dismissed as a ghost story, the kind of thing old sailors mutter about over vodka. But after decades of research, declassified documents, eyewitness testimony, and now imagery recovered from the deepest point on Earth's continental crust, the story of the Lake Baikal swimmers is starting to show signs of something a lot more disturbing than folklore. So before you scroll away thinking this is just another fairy tale, stay with me, because the footage from the bottom is the part nobody can explain. To understand why this story has haunted Russia for so long, you first have to understand the place where it happened. Because Lake Baikal is not a normal lake. It is barely even a lake in the way you think of one. Sitting in the remote wilderness of southern Siberia, curved like a giant crescent scar carved into the surface of the planet, Baikal is the deepest lake in the world by an enormous margin, plunging down 1,642 meters, well over a mile straight down into total darkness. It is also the oldest lake on Earth by a staggering distance. While most lakes live for maybe 10 or 15,000 years before they silt up and disappear, Baikal has existed for an estimated 25 million years. Think about that for a second. This body of water was already ancient when the first human beings walked the planet. It is so vast and so deep that it holds roughly 20% of all the unfrozen fresh water on the entire planet, more than all 5 of the North American Great Lakes combined. If every other source of fresh water on Earth dried up tomorrow, Baikal alone could supply the whole of humanity for nearly 50 years. And here is the part that matters for our story. Almost none of it has ever been explored. The bottom of Lake Baikal is, to this day, one of the least understood places on the surface of the Earth, more mysterious in many ways than the surface of the Moon. We have better maps of Mars than we have of what lies in the deepest trenches of this lake. The people who have lived on its shores for thousands of years, the Buryat, never needed convincing that Baikal was something more than water. To them it has always been sacred, a place of immense and dangerous power. Their shamans use its waters in healing rituals, and certain places along its shores are considered so holy or so cursed that ordinary people are forbidden from setting foot on them. Olkhon Island and a place called Cape Righty are spoken about in hushed tones, treated as gateways to a world beneath this one. And the Buryat have always insisted that the lake is inhabited, not just by fish, by a being they call Luzud Khan, the water dragon master, an enormous armoured creature said to rule the depths. For centuries, outsiders laughed at these stories the same way they laughed at every other native legend. And for centuries, the locals simply shrugged, because they were not telling stories. They were telling history. Now here is where it gets strange, because the Buryat legends are not vague. Cape Righty, on the lake's wild western shore, has a reputation that goes far beyond superstition. So many people have vanished in and around that stretch of coast that the locals consider the entire area cursed, a place that brings certain death to anyone foolish enough to disturb it. Fishermen avoid it. Hunters refuse to camp there. And the strange thing is that the disappearances are not ancient history. They keep happening. Baikal has quietly become Russia's single greatest hotspot for the unexplained. For generations there have been reports of glowing orbs rising out of the water, lights moving beneath the ice, objects diving into the lake at impossible speeds, and a Bermuda Triangle-like pattern of boats and people simply ceasing to exist. The Russians even have a name for the phenomenon of objects seen entering and leaving the water, USOs, unidentified submerged objects, the underwater cousin of the UFO. And Lake Baikal has more documented USO sightings than almost anywhere else on the planet. I want you to hold on to that detail because it is going to matter a great deal later. A sacred lake, older than mankind, deeper than we can explore, with a native population that has insisted for thousands of years that something large and intelligent lives in its depths, and a modern record of objects and lights moving through its waters that nobody can account for. That is the stage. Now let me tell you about the divers. It was the summer of 1982. The Soviet military maintained a training facility on the shores of Lake Baikal, where they put their combat divers, the underwater equivalent of special forces, through some of the most punishing exercises imaginable. These were not tourists or hobbyists. They were among the most highly trained and psychologically screened men in the entire Soviet armed forces, selected specifically because they did not panic, did not hallucinate, and did not break under pressure. The kind of men whose entire job was to stay calm when everything around them said they should be terrified. During a deep dive at around 50 meters below the surface, the divers reported encountering a group of swimmers in the water with them. At first glance you might think, fine, other divers, no big deal. Except these were not other divers. According to the accounts that survived, these figures were enormous, with humanoid bodies stretching nearly 3 meters in length, close to 10 feet tall. They moved through the freezing water with no visible diving equipment, no tanks, no fins, nothing that any human being could possibly survive at that depth and temperature. Their bodies appeared silver, almost metallic, as if they were wearing some kind of tight reflective suit, and several of them had what the divers could only describe as transparent spheres covering their heads, like helmets made of glass or clear crystal. Let that image settle for a moment. 10-foot-tall silver figures, breathing without equipment, in near freezing black water, 50 meters down, simply swimming, as if they belonged there and the humans were the intruders. The divers, trained to suppress fear, did the only thing their conditioning allowed. They surfaced and reported exactly what they had seen, by the book, to their commanding officer. And this is where the story turns from strange to tragic. The commander did not believe them, or perhaps he believed them all too well. Either way, he gave an order that would haunt everyone involved for the rest of their lives. He told them to go back down and capture one of the creatures. 7 divers re-entered the water. 7 trained men descended once more into the dark to do the unthinkable, to lay hands on something that should not exist and drag it to the surface. And they found the swimmers again, exactly where they had been. According to the account, the divers attempted to net one of the beings to physically seize it. And the creatures responded. What happened next is described with a kind of horror that is hard to read. The beings did not flee and did not simply defend themselves. With what witnesses described as effortless, overwhelming force, the swimmers hurled all 7 divers up toward the surface, propelling them from 50 meters down to the open air in a matter of seconds. If you know anything about diving, you already understand what that means, and you understand why it is so much worse than a simple attack. When a diver ascends that fast, the nitrogen dissolved in their blood, under pressure expands violently, forming bubbles inside their bodies, in their joints, their muscles, their brains. It is called decompression sickness, the bends, and it is agonizing and frequently fatal. The men needed decompression chambers immediately. But the base did not have enough chambers for 7 men at once, so the survivors were forced to watch as 3 of their comrades died in front of them, their bodies destroyed from the inside out by the very water they had been ordered back into. The remaining 4 were left permanently disabled, broken men who would carry the injuries and the memory for the rest of their lives. 3 dead, 4 crippled, all because a commander could not accept what his own elite divers had told him they saw. And then, as the Soviet machine always did, the entire incident vanished. No report, no investigation, no record. The men were ordered never to speak of it, and for decades, they didn't. Now I know exactly what you're thinking. This sounds insane. 10-foot silver swimmers in a Siberian lake, thrown to their deaths, all hushed up. It sounds like exactly the kind of thing somebody made up. And if Baikal were the only place on Earth where this had ever been reported, I might agree with you. But here is the thing that stopped me cold when I started researching this, and it is the reason this story refuses to die. It is not the only lake. That very same summer of 1982, on the other side of the Soviet Union, in another deep mountain lake called Issyk-Kul, thousands of kilometers away, Soviet military divers reported almost the identical encounter. Tall humanoid swimmers, underwater. No equipment. The same silver appearance. The same impossible behaviour. 2 separate teams of elite divers in two separate lakes separated by enormous distance, with no internet, no social media, no way to coordinate or copy each other's story, describing the same beings in the same year. And it goes far beyond the Soviet Union. Navies around the world have quietly logged encounters with fast-moving objects and figures beneath the surface of the ocean for as long as there have been navies. American submarine crews have reported sonar contacts moving at speeds no human vessel could match, diving deeper than any submarine could survive. Fishermen across the globe have told stories of tall figures in the water for centuries. The Buryat had Lusud Khan, the armoured ruler of the depths, long before any Soviet diver ever strapped on a tank. Different cultures, different centuries, different oceans and lakes, all circling the same impossible idea that the deep water is not empty and that something is down there that does not want to be found. What struck me most, the same thing that struck me when I first looked into other cases like this around the world, was how consistent the descriptions are. The height, the silver bodies, the intelligence, the deliberate, almost contemptuous way these beings respond to humans, as if we are barely worth their attention. People who could not possibly have spoken to each other, who lived and died centuries apart, kept describing the exact same thing, and that is a very hard pattern to wave away. For a long time, the Lake Baikal story existed only as a whisper, passed between divers and old soldiers, never written down. Then a man named Vladimir Azhaja got hold of it. Azhaja was a former Soviet submariner turned researcher, one of the few people in the USSR willing to publicly collect and publish accounts of exactly this kind of thing, the encounters the state wanted forgotten. He gathered the testimony, the names, the dates, the details of the 1982 incident, and he put them into print, dragging the story out of the shadows and into the public record for the first time. And before I go any further, I want you to remember when this happened. This was the Soviet Union. There was no internet. Information did not flow freely. It was controlled, censored, and locked away. A diver on a remote base in Siberia could not simply post what he saw online for the world to read. For two completely separate dive teams to describe the same beings in the same year, the information would have had to travel through a system specifically designed to stop information from travelling at all. These men were not influenced by viral videos or alien movies or each other. They were describing independently what they swore they saw with their own eyes in the water. Now, I have to be fair, and I will be much more fair later in this video than you might expect, because Azhaja was a controversial figure, and not everyone trusts his accounts. But the core of the story did not die with him. It kept surfacing in interviews, in declassified material, in the testimony of people connected to the Soviet diving program. Like the Buryat legends before it, the story had a way of refusing to stay buried, of bubbling back up no matter how many times it was pushed down. And the more I read, the more I realised something. The 1982 incident was never really the strangest part. It was just the part that had a body count, the part too bloody to fully hide. The strangest part was still waiting at the bottom of the lake. Here is a detail that almost everybody who tells this story leaves out, and it is the detail that turns the whole thing on its head. If the Lake Baikal swimmers were nothing but a drunken fairy tale, if there was truly nothing down there, then why has the Russian state been so obsessed with what lies at the bottom of that lake? In 2008 and 2009, Russia mounted one of the most ambitious deep-water expeditions in its history. They brought in the Mir submersibles, the same legendary deep-diving craft that had been used to film the wreck of the Titanic, and they sent them straight down into the abyss of Lake Baikal. These were not casual tourist trips. These were heavily funded, state-backed scientific missions, and they pushed the submersibles all the way down toward the deepest point of the lake, more than 1,600 meters beneath the surface, into a place no human eyes had ever directly seen. And the level of attention this mission received tells you everything. In 2009, the dive was considered so important that Vladimir Putin himself climbed into one of the Mir submersibles and rowed it down into the depths of Baikal, spending hours beneath the surface, personally operating the craft's manipulator arm to gather samples from the lake bed. Think about that. The leader of one of the most powerful nations on Earth personally descended to the bottom of this specific lake. Politicians do not risk their lives in deep-sea submersibles for ordinary mud and ordinary fish. Whatever was down there, the people at the very top of the Russian government wanted to see it for themselves. Officially, the expeditions were about studying Baikal's unique ecosystem, its 1,700 species found nowhere else on Earth, and its geology. And they did find things. They confirmed enormous deposits of gas hydrates frozen into the lake bed, strange mineral structures, and forms of life adapted to a world of crushing pressure and eternal darkness. But persistent rumours have followed those dives ever since. Rumours that the scientists saw more than they reported, that some of the footage was quietly classified, that the manipulator arms recorded things at the very edge of the lights that were never shown to the public. And that brings us to the part of this story I have been building toward, the reason this video exists, the footage from the bottom. But before I show you what they found down there, I have told you about the sightings. I have told you about the connections across the world, and yes, I have told you to subscribe to this channel and hit that like button so more people can see stories the powerful would rather keep buried. What I have not yet told you is what was on the recovered footage from the floor of Lake Baikal. And once you see what these divers found in the deepest darkness on the continent, you are going to understand why some of them refuse to ever go back in the water. Here is what we can say about the deepest reaches of Lake Baikal, the part that begins where the sunlight ends. Below a few hundred meters, the lake becomes a world of absolute total blackness, colder than ice, and under pressure that would crush an unprotected human body in an instant. It is a place that, for almost the entire 25 million year history of this lake, no eye, human or otherwise, has ever observed. Until we sent machines down with lights and cameras. And the deeper those machines went, the stranger the bottom became. What the deep cameras revealed first were things that, on their own, sound almost mundane until you really think about them. Vast fields of those gas hydrates, methane locked into ice, occasionally erupting in slow plumes that rise through the dark, the kind of phenomenon that could explain some of the lights and disturbances seen from above. Bizarre living mats and sponge formations clinging to the rock. Underwater hot springs venting into the freezing water, creating tiny pockets of warmth in the abyss. Exactly the kind of energy source that life, even strange life, could cling to. And cutting across the lake bed, geological scars and fissures, openings in the rock that descend even further down, into the actual crust of the planet, into spaces we have never mapped and cannot reach. And this is the detail that made every hair on the back of my neck stand up. Lake Baikal sits directly on top of an active rift, a place where the crust of the earth is literally pulling itself apart, slowly tearing open. That rift creates a network of underwater caves, vents and passages, reaching deep beneath the lake bed, beneath the deepest point the submersibles could even reach. The Buryats said it for thousands of years. They said the lake was a gateway to a world beneath this one, and the geology, coldly and scientifically, says they were right. There is a world beneath the bottom of Lake Baikal, an entire hidden architecture of caves and channels in the dark, and we have never seen inside it. Now think back to the 1982 divers, 50 meters down, and the swimmers that breathed without equipment, that survived at depth and cold no human could survive, that responded to capture not with the panic of an animal, but with the cold, calculated, overwhelming force of something intelligent. Where could beings like that possibly live, unseen for thousands of years in the deepest body of fresh water on Earth? They would need a place humans could never reach, a place with energy, with warmth, with shelter. A place exactly like the vent-warmed cave systems threaded through the rift at the very bottom of Lake Baikal. The footage from the bottom did not give us a clear, undeniable shot of a 10-foot silver swimmer staring into the lens. If it had, you would have already seen it on every news channel on Earth, and I think we both know that footage. If it exists, is sitting in a classified archive somewhere. It will never escape. What the footage gave us was something in a way more chilling. It gave us the home. It confirmed beyond any doubt that at the bottom of this ancient lake there is a vast, warm, hidden world of caves and passages and energy, perfectly capable of hiding something large and alive, a world that connects to the deep crust of the Earth itself, a world we have only ever glimpsed at the very edge of our lights before the darkness swallows everything beyond. The divers in 1982 said something was living down there, and the cameras went down and found exactly the kind of place where it could. That is why the leader of a nuclear superpower personally rowed a submersible to the bottom of this lake. That is why the records of 1982 were buried for 40 years. And that is why, when you ask the Russian authorities, What is at the bottom of Lake Baikal? You get scientific papers about gas and sponges, and absolute deafening silence about everything else. I owe you the other side of this because I promised I would be fair, and because every story like this deserves to be tested against the cold light of reason. And I will be straight with you, the skeptics make some very good points, points that deserve to be taken seriously rather than waved away. Start with the 1982 incident itself. The single biggest source for the story is Vladimir Azhaja, and Azhaja was, to put it gently, not a careful researcher. He had a long history of making dramatic, unverified claims about aliens and the unexplained across the Soviet Union, the kind of man for whom a good story sometimes mattered more than a true one. When the central source for an extraordinary claim is someone with a reputation for embellishment, you have to hold the whole thing at arm's length. Then there is the physical evidence problem, and it is a serious one. The managers of the diving base where the incident supposedly happened have flatly stated that the story is nonsense. They point out that there is no record of a single diver ever dying at that base, let alone 3 at once. And there is an even more awkward detail. The nearby town most often associated with the story did not officially become a town until 1984, 2 full years after the incident is supposed to have taken place. When the basic timeline and geography of a story start to wobble, that is a real warning sign, and an honest person has to acknowledge it. And then there is the simplest, most human explanation of all, the one that probably accounts for a huge number of these encounters across history. The deep is a liar. When divers descend below a certain depth breathing ordinary air, the nitrogen begins to affect the brain in a phenomenon called nitrogen narcosis, sometimes called the rapture of the deep. It produces confusion, euphoria, and yes, vivid hallucinations. A narc diver can become absolutely convinced they are seeing things that are not there, and they will swear to it with total sincerity afterward, because to them it was completely real. Add the crushing cold, the disorienting blackness, the genuine danger, and the deep is a place practically engineered to make the human mind see monsters. There are mundane suspects for the physical sightings too. Lake Baikal is home to the Nerpa, the world's only exclusively freshwater seal, a sleek, fast, silvery grey animal that can grow surprisingly large and that moves through the water with a speed and grace that can absolutely startle a diver in low visibility. A Nerpa looming suddenly out of the dark, distorted by panic and depth, and the magnifying effect of a dive mask could plant the seed of a far more terrifying story. The lake also holds enormous ancient sturgeon, armoured prehistoric-looking fish that may well be the real Lusud Khan of Buryat legend. And we cannot ignore the era. This was the Cold War. The Soviet Union was a machine that ran on secrecy and disinformation. And a frightening story about monsters near a sensitive military diving facility might have been exactly the kind of thing the state would either invent or encourage to keep curious civilians far away from waters where it was testing equipment it did not want anyone to see. Sometimes the monster in the lake is just a fence made of fear. So I'm not going to stand here and tell you that 10-foot silver swimmers definitely live at the bottom of Lake Baikal. The honest truth is that the loudest version of this story rests on a shaky source, that the base denies it, and that the human mind under pressure is more than capable of conjuring exactly these horrors out of cold water and bad air. And yet, here is what the skeptics, for all their very good points, cannot quite explain away. They can dismiss Azhaja, but they cannot dismiss why 2 separate teams of elite Soviet divers in 2 separate lakes in the same year, with no way to coordinate, reported the same impossible beings. They can blame nitrogen narcosis, but these were the most psychologically screened men in the Soviet military, selected precisely because they did not crack, and narcosis does not throw 7 trained men 50 meters to the surface and leave 3 of them dead. They can point to seals and sturgeon, but the Buryat have spoken of an intelligent ruler of the depths for thousands of years, long before any Cold War, and Cape Righty keeps swallowing people who go where they should not, right up to the present day. And no skeptic, not one, can explain away the bottom of the lake itself, because the cameras did go down, and they did find a vast, warm, hidden world of caves and vents and passages, reaching down into the unmapped crust of the Earth in the deepest, oldest body of fresh water on the planet, a place we have explored less than the surface of the Moon. The home is real. The hiding place is real. Whether something is living in it is the one question the footage cannot answer. Because every time the lights of our machines push into that darkness, the darkness wins, and the beam fades out into black, long before it reaches the back of the cave. The Russian government has had every chance to put this to rest. They could release every frame of footage from every dive, open every file from 1982, and let the world see for itself that there is nothing down there but mud and methane and ancient fish. Instead, they sent their leader down in a submarine, classified what he saw, and told the rest of us about sponges. The deepest lake on Earth has been keeping its secret for 25 million years. We have been looking for less than a single human lifetime, and only ever at the very edge of the light. And after everything I have read, everything I have seen, and everything they refuse to show us, I cannot shake the feeling that we have only just dipped our toes into the shallows of what is really down there, in the cold and the dark, watching the lights of our little machines come down and waiting for us to come close enough. Because the 1982 divers went looking for something at the bottom of Lake Baikal. And the most terrifying possibility of all is not that they were lying, it is that they actually found it.